Well, we come now to the second section of today's public lecture. And of course, we welcome our good friend Edric Sung, and also coming soon on stage, Pete and Jeff. Okay, while we wait for Jeff to appear, I do have the first question for everyone. And since I understand that Pete and Edric are both church leaders, this first question is really for you. What has the hybrid church meant for your church? Now, what perspectives, what teachings, what guidelines have involved your decision as you go into what now Pete has put up a digital church? Yep.
Maybe to spare Pete the trouble of, because he's been talking for almost an hour at this point, so let me jump in here for him. I really appreciate Pete's enthusiasm and passion for the digital option, the digital product as it might be. I generally concur that digital is enough, but maybe the slight difference in position that I take is that digital is acceptable, but it's not equivalent. I still think there is a little bit more to be said for the physical product, and I think theology, or at least my reading of scripture bears that out, where there is always that preference for that physical connect where possible. Paul and how I long to see you, and Jesus having to offer his hand for Thomas for that physical touch. And I read many of the passages about gathering as literal in the absence of other clarification. So I think the physical gathering is preferable, but I think the digital option, as in many ways what Pete is saying, is enough, is acceptable. And I think that's kind of guides where our church, which is a BBTC in the East, I'm sitting here in my office right now, that kind of what has guided our church into the lines that we're drawing for when we're going to meet physically, when we're going to meet online. I think in Singapore, we're a little bit more blessed at the moment because we're not quite in the same degree of lockdown as we were in a few months ago. So we actually are at the place where we have the option, where churches can decide if they want to meet with certain restrictions, for example, 250 maximum per venue, if there is sufficient spacing between people, etc. So right now, it does come down to the churches to make that choice. It is come down to the point of choice. Do you want to continue to meet online only? Do you want to continue to, do you want to just reconvene completely? Or do you want to try to find that bridging hybrid model, building on the lessons that we've learned in the last 10 to 12 months? In some cases, you might want to do physical. In some cases, you might want to do it digital. And in some cases, you might want to try to do both. So just to give an example right now, my church has a monthly praise and prayer session, our worship and intercession session, and that they have decided to go fully digital right now, is on Zoom somewhere if I'm not wrong, for this season. Whereas when it comes to the main service, we have it online and on-site at the same time. So on-site and it's live stream. And for every event that we go through now, we ask every single department head, every single service or a leader to make that choice. What are they going to be, on-site or online? And to fully justify that. So I think the thought process is very important right now, because previously you just defaulted to certain defaults. Meet law, that's what we do, and that's what we do, right? As churches, we just meet. But I think we've come to the point where we see some of the weaknesses of that perspective, where we're not really thinking about it. If we meet in person, what about the people who cannot come and who cannot come for whatever reason? So, for example, in Singapore, the elderly are considered, or pregnant women are considered more vulnerable. So it's recommended they don't leave the house and join large congregations. So, if going on site means that we exclude other people, then have we thought about that? Because in the past, we just wouldn't have thought about that. We would have said, well, too bad, maybe they can find a suitable church for them somewhere else. But now we have the options. I think what we found though is that it is so taxing for us to continue to offer multiple options. So everyone now is online and on-site. And I think really that's where the decision point is being forced out of many churches. To go on-site, you need X number of people to hold the service. To go on-site and online, you need to layer on another 6 to 8 people who are holding cameras and doing the live streaming, and another 2 or 3 people to do the online engagement, and another 3 to 5 people to do the online counseling, etc., etc. I think that really is the deal breaker for many churches right now. Can they afford the manpower and as well as the associated costs to go down that path?
Can I come in here? I think that point that Edric makes about the disabled, the housebound, the pastoral need for some engagement in digital or physical church, digital church, is really, really important. The last thing I want to do is to say that I want the church to go lock, stock, and barrel into the digital age and only digital, because that blows the whole thing apart. I think that we need to have this sense of both and, that both are good, and we try and find different ways in which those are good. Now that might mean that some churches are wholly physical, some churches are wholly digital, and that we actually allow that to be part of God's greater mission. I think God's definitely in the digital zone, and I think that people have been searching for God in the wild and have found him there. So missiologically, I think it's really important to stay in digital. But the last thing we can do, we can't burn out all of our pastors and all of our church teams. We need to allow people to find a right balance between what they do. And if people's ministry is in digital, praise God, go for it. If people's ministry is in physical, praise God, go for it. If somehow you can mix the two up and perhaps do services physical, but then move lots of your discipleship online, then perhaps that's a good model as well. But we need to play to all of our strengths and all the possibilities because of where we are.
Okay. Thank you, Pete and Edric, and I think that's correct. A lot of this what's happened when we are forced in the digital space is really we suddenly realize there are a lot of people who actually need some aspects of that. Jeff, do you have any comments on what we've been said so far?
I'll just maybe add on what Pete mentioned earlier on about the similarity between churches and businesses. So the pandemic in itself, certainly in Singapore, although we are quite blessed in the situation right now, but you can see a lot of businesses are trying to regain their grounds, trying to rebuild their business. The last couple of months, where when some of the businesses went into lockdown, you realize that the businesses that have very strong connection by offering one-to-one human interaction service or product will be faced with a lot of challenges. Health and beauty, for example, F&B, right? Enrichment classes where you conduct lessons where there's a group of people, live concerts, for example, and of course, religious organization. You realize that when the lockdown came about very abruptly, it kind of just slammed the brakes on all the business continuity, as we say it. A lot of the business had to really scramble and find their ways to provide, to kind of just sustain their business by providing their business and services to their current customer pool, right? This was exactly what the many churches around the world, including in Singapore, scramble and try to see how can we reach out to our existing flock. But if you realize that some of the businesses who are already online or have some digital presence in the form of commerce, in the form of social media, they already have that pool of connection. They were quite quick to be able to have that business continuity. As we look at the current situation right now, so earlier on we had a quick discussion before this lecture. The people in the industry, especially for the hair salon, people who provide eyelashes and pedicure, manicure, that kind of health and beauty businesses are really badly hit in Singapore. Personally, I've got few friends who are in this business. Because of the social distancing rule that is being enforced right now in the community, it makes it very hard for scalability, because if you can't have the same number of people coming into that place, you can't have them funding the money to actually hire the staff, right? Now, similarly, in a religious organization, in this case, a church in particular, a church is very high touch, and a church is not seen as high tech, although some churches are more high tech than the others. It's very high touch, spiritually and also physically. And you find that most churches who do not have the infrastructure, have the resources, will find it very, very challenging to start from ground zero. And then you have to depend a lot with the support of volunteers to actually have the, in this case, the continuity of the services.
Okay. Gentlemen, any other thoughts about this? Well, there's on Slido, there's actually quite a lot of questions about this, but you hold this there, and let's move on to the next question, which is more seeing things from the industry perspective. Now, given the rapid and varied developments in the digital industry, now what trends and concerns should pastors and church leaders take note of? Should we church leaders just stay in our churches, just focus what's happening in church, or should we take note of some trends that will have an impact and hit us like a tsunami without warning? Yes, go ahead.
Can I come in just quickly? I think sort of what Jeff said is really, really important. And I think that the way in which businesses have responded to the COVID crisis needs to be reflected upon and compared to how the church is responding. And we do have an institutional issue about, so we're set up as a physical business, high touch centered and so on. And we do need to look at whether that is the best way that we're set up. Edric's right, if we try and do both models all the time, we're just going to burn out all of our pastors and burn out our ministry teams. But I don't think that means that we need to jump backwards and say, as soon as everything clears up, we're going to go totally physical. Because I think that's actually the model which is going back out of network society, out of digital society, and saying that we become a kind of, historical anomaly in a way. And we become like those businesses which have gone out of business because of COVID and what's happened. We do need to look at the future, but perhaps we need to actually rethink our work teams. Perhaps we need to look at who our volunteers are, because there are actually so many people who are involved in digital industries, both in the UK, but especially over there in Singapore as well, which is far more advanced than we are digitally here in the UK. So we need to kind of look at who can we co-opt into those ministry teams to ensure that we change the nature of our church business. That we change the who are on which teams, who's in the hierarchy, who's in the management team, and so on, who's guiding what we're doing, so that if there is another COVID or another pandemic, we're not found to be kind of so short of the person power or the skills that we need within the church. So we need to co-opt digitality into the very core of the church's being already.
There's actually a historical aspect to this in Singapore. Not sure how it will work across every country, but in Singapore, there was a huge church planting boom in the late 70s and early 80s, around the time when Billy Graham came to Singapore. Correspondingly, it means a lot of the church leaders in Singapore right now are in that generation where they're in their 60s. Some would have hit their 70s already. I'm not being ageist here, but I'm just from interactions with my father and other people of a similar ilk. Their adoption of digital, it takes them a little bit longer to come to terms with certain concepts, to adopt certain things as natural and normal. So I think that's one of the big problems facing the Singapore church. I can't speak for the global church right now, but a lot of the church leaders who may say the right things or know in their heart of hearts that they do need to pivot to some degree, they're really struggling to do that right now. So, and that affects a lot of the churches in Singapore.
Well, maybe back to Jeff. Are there certain trends we spoke earlier offline regarding some trends that Google has picked up in its survey of 2020, right? What do you think of those trends? What would be something that is important for church to take note of?
Okay, so actually, this is something that you can find readily. In fact, if you do something like let me just see. I won't share the screen. There's this thing called Year in Search 2020. If you did that search on Google, you would be able to find a localized version in your region from whichever part of the country you're coming in from. There is what I'm going to share right now is basically insights on Google search trend that's happened in Asia, right? So it's very interesting because in times of uncertainty, people search they keep searching. For pre-believers, that they don't search from the scriptures, they search from Google, right? So Google's like God to them. They search for stability, they search for safety, they search for something to believe in. There's also a resurgence on religion and spirituality and wellness, all coming together. There are some interesting things that I kind of picked up. What people are searching, they're searching to care for themselves, to care for others and environment, to care for work-life balance, and also to basically care for the future. And why should we be looking into this? Because we have the Great Commission, and we're looking at the general population at large. And if Google Insights can point us to what the volume of what people are searching, perhaps as a church, as we slowly move back into a new normal, we should look into this data and see how we can continue our journey in our digital strategy and engagement. So for example, the first part where we talk about care for self, there's an increase of 40% of people around Asia that's looking for mental health related issues. There's a plus 250% of people who basically type in what to say to someone depressed. This is coming very strongly from the Philippines. And what does it mean for us as believers? If we know that mental wellness is on the rise and people are depressed, what does the Bible say to that? How can we arm our congregation to be the salt and light in this area to our colleagues, to our neighbors, and to perhaps even have a destination where people can come and seek out the information that's related to mental wellness? And then we look at people searching for care. There is a lot of people. There's a plus 2,000% increase in the search on volunteer activities when people are cooped up and they still try ways and means to help raise funds to do things for the community. Are we able to, as a church, provide that kind of platform to first engage people first and then enroll them into the belief? In the past, people need to first believe before they can belong in our organization. But I think right now, because of the content, because of the accessibility of information and movement, people can now be part of it, belong first, and then slowly along the way, when they have interaction with believers, and then they can then take the leap to believe. And then if you look at people searching for work-life balance, information about work-life balance, 130% people are searching this term, kids at home. I think a lot of parents are really worried what to do with their children at home, because the coexistence of children and work at home is just disastrous. So the parents are stressed. 80% increase on how to be productive. And then, of course, 125% increase in the search of gaming chair. I think Edric is one of them. He has one of those fancy gaming chair right now. He's sitting on it right now. And also people are looking into the care for future, like, because as they know that they're going to move out of the lockdown, they're going to move now into the new normal, the care for future. You see people searching for, there's a plus 400% of people searching for the fundamentals of digital marketing. 250% are searching for side businesses, stock trading. And many, like over 100% increase in searching for online platform. So early on, Pete talked about how can we enroll people in the media to actually co-opt them into our pool of volunteers. Herein lies an opportunity for us to engage people, perhaps from the marketplace, to have a dialogue and how we can upskill and retrain people just so that they can get ready for the future. So I thought this information would kind of maybe point us in the right direction as we recalibrate and think about our engagement plan as we move back into a new world.
Thank you, Jeff. Now, I was just wondering, now that you put this up, right? A lot of people are trying to recalibrate so that they can have new skills for the new skills for the new economy. But also that's the flip side. It also basically means that there are a lot of people who are affected. They are brick and mortar business that can't get out. And so there's going to be a lot of structural unemployment. What's the church thinking about this? You know, Edric, as pastor, do you see signs of that happening, that people can't readapt the new norm? And what must the church brace ourselves for in terms of ministering, showing pastoral care for these people?
If you work in a church, you will have an answer for this on a daily basis. My church, we have a community services wing based in here. I also run a couple of Christian websites. And what I found through the Christian websites is there's an amazing number of people out there, or amazing is probably the wrong word to use, an unfortunate number of people out there who have needs and concerns that are clearly pastoral issues, but they have no one to pastor them, or no one that they believe they can reach out to. And a lot of that is down to the fact that we all want to be a church with open walls, but it's not always the case that churches feel like they are open. It could be in the way we position ourselves. Are we too squeaky clean? Are we too, does it feel like we're not interested in the concerns of the rough and the dirty world out there? It could be in our geography. It could be in the hours in which our gates are open. Literally, are we a church with open doors, etc., etc.? If a person is gonna come into my church after his work shift with something that he's ministering to, will he be able to find anyone except my cleaners, for example? So during the COVID season, since the what we had, the circuit breaker here in Singapore, our equivalent of the lockdown, that's really gone up by a tremendous amount. The number of people who come in here, we used to have people come in here and ask for things all the time. Now that happens all the time. And as I'm an editor of a Christian website, we're not a digital church, but we have so many people who just reach out to us. Today, for example, I had someone who had emailed us asking because her son was killed, and she just wants to find a community of other moms who have lost their adult children, for example. Where are you going to find a church with that specific combination? So that's one of the advantages the digital space does offer us. We aggregate, we have a common meeting point, we have a searchable platform, a reachable platform, an accessible platform that the physical church isn't always able to benefit from. The needs are tremendous, but I worry about the church. I can't speak for other countries, but I speak for the church in Singapore. You know, if we triangulate church members, our income, in Singapore, what we call our SES, our social economic status, etc., you'll find that we are clearly upper middle class compared to the typical Singaporean. You can figure out by the size of their housing. You can figure out by the average education that they have. It's all in our national, every 5 years we have a national census. If I'm not wrong, for example, the percentage of Singaporeans who lives in a 5-room flat or above is something like 18%, but amongst Christians that figure that almost doubles to something like 33%, right? So if we are different in our experiences, in our lived experience, in our collective experience, in our background, in our friends, in the language that we speak, in the places that we hang out, then we become a lot less relevant potentially to a lot of people. Digital does level things out a lot, but at the same time, digital isn't a perfect cure, because there is also a digital divide for those people in need. A lot of them don't have the same level of access to digital networks, to computers, to mobile phones, etc., etc. So that's another issue that might be beyond the church to completely resolve. But if your simple question is, in this day and age, are the needs expanding? The very simple answer is absolutely yes. And Jeff's comment about you can search and there will be analytics to explain the degree to which it is more needful. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, can I just come in? I think the church has got a big problem because we both want to kind of, we're told to go out to the nations and to make an impact. So that means we need to be missionally aware. We need to be aware of the context in which we are doing mission. So, you know, Jesus said, you know, before he ascended to heaven, you know, go and preach to all nations. Yeah. But at the same time, we need to transform society. We need to change society. We need to actually push push our own agenda. So baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So the baptism bit kind of signals that there are going to be church things that we want to be doing, which are different from what society wants to do. But how do we kind of get the balance between kind of going and meeting society's needs with actually following what God is telling us to do and changing that society as we go along? And this is always the kind of, you know, the two sides of what we're trying to do in the church, and we can be kind of pulled apart by those different possibilities. And it's getting a balance within each church. One of the things we could do in contemporary society is create effective alliances. And so we kind of decide that we're going to focus on a particular area of work in our church. So it may be creation care, it may be about social care, it may be about looking after the elderly or the people with mental health issues. Well, that's all of us, isn't it? So we're looking after everybody. But it may be that building an effective alliance around a particular issue in consultation with all the other churches in your area may be a good way to move forward, rather than try to do everything in the same time. I mean, it's the same with digital physical, you know, just as digital physical will burn out the church, so trying to meet everybody's needs because we've seen it on Google is going to burn out everybody as well. So it's kind of prayer and discernment and focus upon what our ministry is about is really, really important.
Thanks, Pete. Well, on this note, perhaps we can go on to the third question that we have. Basically, it's already covered to some extent that you have mentioned. All of you have different contexts of churches, both locally and overseas. What's your assessment of what are struggles that the churches have, and what encouraging positive stories have you encountered? What lessons can we learn? I know particularly Edric was just chatting with me that he's actually heading up a survey of Singaporean churches about this very topic, and perhaps it's the time that you want to share it with us.
Yeah, so when you came up with this question, I realized good to have some data to back up some of what I was saying. So we have among a group of pastors in Singapore, the particular network of churches, we just rolled out a survey of church leaders about how they are doing 1 year into this COVID situation. So allow me to just share the slides and just bring us through some of the findings so far. It's an ongoing survey, so I haven't been able to break down the results to the degree that I'd like to, or to break it down by like age group or different tiers, etc. But I'll just give you the top level results, just so that we can all have a little bit of a snapshot of how church leaders feel the church is going right now as it stands, right? So ongoing open survey. I was supposed to close it after this weekend, but here we go so far. With about 180 plus respondents at this point, just so that we know where we are. Churches in Singapore, majority have restarted to some degree on premises, on site, right? With less than a fifth not yet having done that, and some not even sure when they're going to be doing it. So we're talking about, generally speaking, an on-site church environment at the moment. Once churches are allowed to increase in capacity, what proportion of your church membership do you think will return to physical services? So here is the pessimists. Well, the reality rather on the ground of churches is that 28% of respondents think that less than half their members are going to come back to physical church, to on-site church, right? With only maybe 30+% saying they'll get 3/4 or more. Of course, some will have taken advantage of this season by really ramping up their digital outreach efforts, really upping their game and becoming so good online that people will come and be attracted on site, right? So something more will come back than before COVID. But generally speaking, this the mood amongst pastors in Singapore is quite pessimistic as for whether people will come back on site. And for the reasons that they feel members will not come back, the most cited reason would be that inertia. After all these months, we closed down in early April, right? We were only incrementally allowed back from August or so onwards. After all these months, 2/3 of pastors say that a lot of people, they just see a lot of inertia. There's still half of them cite health and safety concerns. In Singapore, generally speaking, the members of the congregation are still not allowed to sing out loud, even though we do have some live worship on the stage at the moment. And well, maybe there's a positive. About a third also said maybe online services are good enough. They have not merely a supplement, but have supplanted the on-site product, right? But inertia is the biggest concern here. Will your church continue online services even after on-site services fully resume? 6 in 7 say yes, they will, with a few more saying yes, we will sometimes. So generally speaking, on-site online is here to stay by the look of it. The preference is the large majority will do so on live stream via YouTube or Facebook. It's a bit cut off there. It's YouTube or Facebook, with some going with delayed Zoom, etc., etc. But YouTube or Facebook is the main choice. How do you personally feel about the quality of your church's online services? Pastors are pleased with their digital video and comms teams. Only 5% are a bit negative about what they see in their online product. But I think by and large, I head up a comms team and I'm really proud of them, for example. And I think most churches recognize the how far we've come in the last 8 to 12 months of online church. So that's a good thing for all of us who are involved in online church. Will we continue to conduct cell group and equipping via digital means when things return to normal? Only 7% say absolutely not. Let's just go back to on-site for everything. A large bulk say that they will to some degree or another. 1/5 say as a default things will be online, and 70%, 71% say yeah, we're totally open to the idea. So I think that's what Pete and I were talking about earlier. Horses for courses, where it makes the most sense, why not do it that way? Has your church cell group attendance? So we find some dichotomies in some of the responses here. Has your church cell group attendance been affected by the COVID season? Same is 1/3, but 42% say they think more are attending cell group than before, and 26% say that the cell group attendance has dropped. And I think anecdotally that has borne out. We hear a lot of examples of cell group members who wouldn't ordinarily attend for good reasons. For example, they're overseas studying, but now they can join back in, or for not so good reasons, but now they've just come back in anyway. And some of it is really necessary stuff. They talk about people who have been left out in the wilderness and they've been maybe burnt by the economic situation, etc., or just by the loneliness of the season, and they're coming back to cell group. So on that note, that's a good thing, but merely coming back alone is not a pure qualitative measure of things. For that, we're talking about, is the digital product, is the online church actually engaging people? And that's where we find a difference in some of these answers. In general, how do the pastors feel about the engagement level of their members? More than half, I think this adds up to 61%, say that their members are less or much less engaged with the church as they used to be. So more are coming back to cell group, but they are not so engaged as they used to be. So there is something about this digital divide that even though we are here and there's 100 plus of us who are talking, there is a sense of it's not quite the same. It's not quite as engaging somehow. Of course, that could be a skill set issue. We may not have just come to terms with how to best use the technology. How do you think your members' personal discipleship journey has been affected in COVID? It skews towards the negative. So 45% of pastors think that their members' personal discipleship journey has taken a turn for the worse amid COVID. So we can say that it might be a positive, more chance to read the online Bible, more chance to connect, etc. But the gut feel from the pastor's point of view is it may not be working out quite that way. And then there's the higher degree of engagement we're talking about is volunteerism. How do you feel your members, are they as willing to serve, to volunteer to serve as before COVID? And this is, pastors will have a more realistic view of this, because the other ones is sort of a gut feel, but this one is actual number of people signing up as volunteers and appearing as volunteers to serve in their church teams. And here we have more that say that fewer are coming than before. How do you think your passion, I'm really interested in these next couple of slides, which is all about evangelism. How has their passion for evangelism? So, we've just gone past Christmas and we're coming to Chinese New Year. These are really good evangelism seasons. And the feel from the ground is 39% say that, I think my members are less passionate about all of this, compared to 22% who says, well, maybe there's a portion of them that are better at this digital engagement. Maybe the younger generation has more ways to put digital and evangelism resources out there. But generally, this skews in the pessimistic side of things. And as far as actual programming and events, definitely with Christmas just passed, I think this is way heavy on everyone's minds. We had a Christmas events, but no matter how well we did them, we were limited by the number of people that could have come into the services, let alone for some other churches. So for some churches, for example, if you don't own your own premise, you can't do anything on a weekday night. Right? So you can only do it on a weekend, and that will be affected. Now, if you are able to go online fully, then this number would have skewed into the positive. But apparently, a lot of churches are still struggling to transition their plans for on-site events into an online equivalent. Yeah, so quite a heavy skew for this particular question, and even more so when it comes to missions work. 71% say missions work, which I guess traditionally is thought of as a very online product. We've had some very good, traditionally thought of as an on-site thing. You have to go overseas to do missions work. We've had some amazing stories. I know Simon Xiao out of Indigenous Crew tells this wonderful thing where his daughter couldn't go on a mission trip to Mongolia, so they organized a Learn English via Zoom or via Facebook or something, and they had 200 people from Mongolia come to their online outreach event. So it can happen, but the pastors aren't really figuring this out. This is what this particular statistic tells me. Mercy and charitable ministries. I think this one will find quite balanced because there have been a lot of opportunities. I mean, Jeff's trends and the rise in searches for volunteerism, etc., shows that there really have been a lot of opportunities to serve. You know, myself over the past couple of weeks, some of my church members have been going, blessing people block by block with, with the needy with food, etc. So it's there to be had if we are intentional about it. A big question for those of us who work in a church: how has your church tithing been affected? 26% says, yeah, we're getting more money, which is amazing. I would love to see how these churches are doing it. But really, the 41% say, and this one the pastors know the actual dollar figure to this, 41% say we're getting a bit less money in. From anecdotal evidence, churches with older congregations are really badly hit by this because they can't figure out how to educate their members, their older members, to do the whole online transfer thing as effectively. And as a result, has your church had to scale back on ministry plans or expenditure? 28% said, yeah, they had to. And a few more said, yeah, we probably will have to. And an interesting 8% said, no, we're gonna spend more as a result of all this. I suspect a large part of this already has gone into video and comms, which is not a cheap realm of outreach of church work to go into. But there you have it. We're having to tighten our belts as a result of the tithing. And finally, our last question there, just for a gut feel of how we're doing, is: do you personally feel that we're living in the end times? And 73% of pastors say yes, we are. And this slide is actually a little bit more important than merely just for fun, because if we really are living in the end times, it would suggest we would do things with a certain end times rhythm, a certain end times urgency, a certain end times mindset. I'm just thinking of this guy who I just heard of recently, who had a chance to buy a house. And in Singapore, you can buy freehold, which is forever, or you can buy leasehold, which is up to 99 years. And his specific rationale for buying the leasehold house, which Singaporeans are a bit averse to, is that, you know what, I think Jesus is going to come again soon. So why do I spend all that money on a place that's not going to outlast Jesus? So if a person buying a house can think that way with an end times mindset, for those of us who are helping Jesus to build this house, so to speak, the house which is the church, are we then pivoting? Are we then adjusting our church structures, our church spending habits, our church hiring habits, our church formatting, how we preach, what we preach, how we do worship online, outside, etc., in such a way as it emanates that end times urgency? So I think this question should really inform a lot of what we're doing as church builders and as church leaders.
Thank you, Edric, for the very informative deck of slides. We look forward to the publication of it when everything has been finalized. How about Pete? Any thoughts about stories? How have people, churches in general in UK, adapted?
Yes, I think the general story is everyone's adapted very, very well. So this kind of sense of all the church going online, or joining the churches that are already online, because the handicapped and the housebound have always been online, and it's been a kind of digital church forever, or at least since digital started. So we mustn't think that kind of we're creating something new. We're just joining people who are there already. But I've been really kind of challenged by the small churches that have done some very important local stuff. So one little church in Gateshead that we've done some kind of looking case studies on, which kind of did, they've got about 60 people go to their church congregation and 40 members. But they started doing Facebook adverts for the 1 kilometre around their church. So they're not searching for people to get, to come in from all around the UK or all around the world. They're just going for that small group, 1 kilometre around where they live. And they're now getting 1,000 views per week. on their services. Okay, and they've gradually grown the view times from 4 minutes up to now 37 minutes is the average. Okay, and that's for a 45-minute online service. So in a way, they've trained their local community to both, first of all, find them online, but then also engage with them online as well, and to become more and more, this is translating them into actual disciples rather than just converts to digital space and so on. So I really like that image, and they found their funding's gone up. They're getting more funding in because of the engagement. And I think it's that kind of thing about what's digital good for? Digital's good for connecting. It's good for social communication and so on. It's not very good for having a meal together. Yeah. And that means you've got to kind of flip over and say, well, how then do we provide meals? What do we do? In our community here where I live, we're all locked down. But just before Christmas, we got together on somebody's drive. There's 10 households who came together and just kind of stood around talking, socially distanced, and everything was fine. But kind of sharing something of what it meant to be. That's kind of fellowship, the kind of community that you can have. And it's really trying to apply the appropriate technique or the appropriate delivery system for what's happening. I'm really keen to kind of follow through with what Edric's survey says, because there's some really important stuff there. The church in Ireland also did a kind of similar kind of research back in the middle of the summer during the lockdowns. And Gladys Ganiel, who's the professor in Belfast at Queen's University, did this research. They entitled it "People Still Want Us" or "People Still Need Us," which I thought was a very kind of needy kind of title for the research project. But the research showed that actually in a time of crisis, people still turn to the church. They want to see what the church has to say. They want to see what God has to say. And I think it's really important that we remain in the public square, in the public space. The question is, of course, where that public space is nowadays, because it's often digital. And it's actually allowing ourselves to have some influence within public society that's really, really important.
Thanks, Pete. Well, before we go into a Q&A, maybe Jeff, do you have any things to add, or especially on someone who is a church member rather than from the pastoral team?
Yeah, so speaking as a church member, I just touch on what Pete mentioned earlier on about the burnout, because that struck a bell in me, right? So I think maybe just as a representation of someone who's from the industry and also as a church member, the effects of work from home has definitely caused a lot of pressure to the members, right? So many of the workforce are still working from home. And I think large organization has kind of changed the way they engage their workforce as well. I mean, for our organization, we've actually returned one level of our office space to the landlord, because we find that we can actually operate remotely quite successfully for the last 1 year. So and a lot of people are actually getting used to it. So I think having the empathy of what the members are going through is also very important. And of course, as the pastoral team and the volunteers are working tirelessly to actually bring all this content, all this engagement, trying to replicate the kind of ministry that we used to have offline, online, and that going, it's just like working overtime. Sometimes I feel that they're just like working the extra hours just to bring that engagement to the congregation is commendable, and therefore I think the issue of burnout may be there. So I think the self-care for volunteers and pastoral team is very important, because this journey that we are going back into the new normal possibly would kind of suggest that we have two churches to run, one in the physical church and one in the digital church. So I think that the need to widen the volunteer pool, and also to look into the self-care is key. I also think that the rise of the home church during the lockdown, and even right now, because not all 250 slots are available for all the congregation, perhaps the church could encourage. I mean, for our cluster, our cell group, what we do is during worship, Sunday service, homes are being opened up for various members to come for fellowship, and also to participate in the live service, the online service. I think this helps us to have a certain sense of accountability as well, because sometimes I do confess, when we're alone, we get very distracted sometimes. When you sit on the sofa, you try to screencast, but then once in a while, because you're at home, I need to get a cold drink, and then you go out, and then you come back. There's this ability to rewind, to pause, and the posture may not be right. So that's why the going back into engaging into a live worship when possible is still highly encouraged. Perhaps what we could possibly do is to allow people gathering at home to be streamed into the live service. Maybe a little bit of attendance checking, but to actually allow praise report to come into place, so that it doesn't feel like a monologue, so that it feels that we are using the technology to the best, where we can still engage. I mean, the easiest way is actually to arrow, to assign different cell group to say, okay, you're on duty. We really hope that you can use this opportunity to do a praise report, because praise report, I realize that it's really important to just inspire, to spur, and to fire up the believers on what people are doing. In terms of our physical outreach to the community, especially when we read about cases where the church community coming together to provide food for the migrant workers, vulnerable families, and I think this kind of show and tell is actually quite important. Yeah, so just some suggestion from the congregation.
Thanks, Jeff. It's always good to have some degree of reality check here. Now, I'm cognizant that we are running into 1983. What I would like to do, hopefully with agreement with everyone who's watching, that we're going to just drag this on to about 9:40, so they have about good 20 minutes to just focus on the Q&A. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to cover everything, but what I can look at is there are a few questions. I think the first one would probably be for Pete. One phrase it this way: that Marshall McLuhan say that the medium is the message. You have said that online or digital tech is not neutral. What's the negatives of this medium? I think bound up with this is also that if digital is the medium, then what do you do with the physical? There are quite a number of questions, like if we go full blast on digital and there's no physical mediation, what does that mean? I think you've suggested a little bit during the lecture. Maybe you can unpack this a bit more for us.
Sure. So Marshall McLuhan said back in the 1970s, 80s that the medium is the message. It's a very old hackneyed phrase, which kind of doesn't really kind of pick up really what he's trying to say, and it's used in so many different ways now as well. He's trying to say that the kind of the medium is the kind of background cultural kind of norm, and that projects itself into our conversations and into our arguments. So, example, you look at the way in which I've kind of put a digital background to myself. It raises issues about kind of the matrix. It raises issues about coding and strange languages and artificial intelligence and that kind of thing. And so in a way, this medium that I've put behind me transfers itself across my message. Okay, it adds something. It kind of transforms what I'm trying to say. And if I put a kind of nice sunset picture or a picture of the snow or something in the background, that would have projected a different kind of message as well. So all the time our communications are molded by the context in which we speak. Now, people say today that means that if you do digital, then you kind of open the doors to the whole of digital culture. All the horrors of TikTok and Twitter and goodness knows what else. Yeah, some of which we've seen, kind of the repercussions of which we've seen recently in Washington DC. If we kind of I've got two ways to go here. If that's true, then we need to be very, very careful about what we're bringing with us into the world of the church. But I'm not sure that kind of we can say that any culture coming in isn't prone to that same kind of challenge and same kind of destruction or distortion of what our message is. But we don't want as well to be this kind of, it's this whole thing about kind of either going with culture or standing against culture. Do we really want to create a church which is so countercultural and so against contemporary culture that we can't speak the same language? Do we really want to kind of start speaking in Jesus' language of first century Aramaic? Because that's what he spoke, that's the culture he had. Adopt that culture as the way that we do things. So all of our churches suddenly become kind of Palestinian, first century Palestinian kind of cultural enclaves. Of course we don't. We want to go there and be engaged in the society that we are at the moment. But we do need to be discerning about what aspects of contemporary culture we need to adopt and what aspects we don't. And as I've said all the way along, no, I'm not a fan of digital only. I'm a fan of hybrid. And we need to work out a proper way we get the balance between being both digitally present and physically present within our contemporary society. And I think that's one of the ways in which we discern where we should be going.
Thanks, Pete. Well, Edric, you did mention, as you comb through your different ministries, that there was always the question, are we going digital? Are we going mixed? Are we going physical, right? So you must have deliberated on some of these questions. How will it affect physical communion and so on? Can you share with us some of your thoughts on this?
Are you specifically asking about communion?
No, not communion. Communion is a community fellowship.
Okay, because I really didn't want to go there with the communion. I have
neither do I. Okay.
Can you just ask the question again one more time, just so that I get this right? Yeah.
Oh, as your ministries deliberate whether should we stay digital or go physical or go half-half, I think one of the key concern is physicality of fellowship. So what are some of the things that went through your mind when your ministry design?
At the end of the day, it's philosophical. Our church basically sets a stand on what our preference is, and we go as far as we can towards that preference. Philosophically, we have read doctrine as preferring the physical meeting. So wherever possible, to whatever degree is possible, we will physically meet. In fact, right now, apart from skipping my church praise and prayer session, I'm also skipping my church, my cell group at the moment. They're in some other room somewhere right now. And I'll join them for that physically, now that we're allowed to here in Singapore. So it really comes down to that. It's a flow chart of preferred, and if it can't happen, then what's the next preferred option? I think what happened for our church is where we just by default, the DNA is, well, we like to make decisions early on things rather than pontificate or deliberate too long on them. So once we set that bar for, okay, this is what we're going to try to do, then we'll try to do it to whatever degree until information changes or the guidelines change thereafter. I found one of the things that I worry about in many churches is that they do spend a lot of time deliberating on some of these things. And the more time you spend deliberating, so for example, I know some people who left their church because their church couldn't come to terms with whether or not they would restart the on-site service. By the time they finally did, they lost people to various other churches. And that's one of the biggest concerns, because the church leader, we are fully aware of all of the weight and the burden of the decisions. But meanwhile, you have people with needs, people with need for community, people with need for receiving ministry, some people who just can't do the digital thing, so they really just want to come back to church, etc. And that's where we do them a disservice if we don't come to terms with these things really quickly. So for us, we just we stuck our flag in pretty early on. We decided to make the whole process of working with the government, etc., to see what can and can't be done as painless as possible. We contacted them proactively, preemptively, and what can we do, what can't we do. We put ourselves signed up for all of the pilot programs for when can we start meeting, when can we start singing, etc., etc. And that's where we went with it. And whatever a church decides to do, just go, be fully convicted, fully committed to it. If you're going to go digital, online in a big way, online church, cell groups only, forget about the physical service, it might work. It might work, but you have to really make it work. And I think we will, every week that we're not doing that is a week that we are going to start losing people, either to another church, which is not so bad, or to no church at all, which is terrible.
Well, I'm going to just augment this question because there's another question that popped up that's related to this. And Jeff, if feel free to chime in on this. So we've been talking about those of us who have existing business, existing church, right? But what about church planting? So if I were to plant a church right now, would the same considerations hold, or will you change? If it's a greenfield project, will you go straight into digital? No. Any thoughts on this?
Let me just jump into just a really quick principle that we have for this. If you want to, you know the old children's Sunday school song, Deep and Wide. And our approach to this is, if you want to go deep, go pastoral. If you want to go wide, go digital. So I think if I was in a church planter mode right now, I would be totally looking at a digital approach for marketing, for finding the target pool. I love the idea of using targeted ads within 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers of your location that you intend to build in, of the cell groups, the cell leaders' home, etc., etc. You can do all of that. So, for example, we have a special needs service right now in my church, which we actually see as an outreach project, because there's a lot of caregivers to special needs kids who could really use that 2 hours break, and we say, just bring your kids over to our special needs service and we'll take care of the kid. We'll love your kid like no one's ever loved your kid before. And one of the things that they're going to start doing this year is exactly that, geographically targeted advertisement. So if I was in a church planter mode, to go wide, to just get that catchment in, I will totally use every single digital resource at my disposal. But there'll come a point where you have to go deep. And that's where the pastoral, the touch point, the face-to-face will really make a difference.
Thanks, Cedric. Jeff, Pete, thoughts?
Sorry, I was just trying to find my mute button. I just really back what Edric just said there. That idea about going, deep and pastoral, or wide and digital is really good kind of thing. That you need to kind of work out a way in which this piece of work that you want to do can have the biggest impact in the most appropriate way. The ads for Facebook for 1 kilometer are about £5 here in the UK. They're really cheap and they're really effective. That's one of the ways in which we can do things really well. But you need to kind of work out beforehand, what's your missiology, what's the purpose of the piece of work that you want to do, and who do you want to impact, and that's really crucial. But also the whole thing about working with government is really important. Because government really needs us at the moment, because we bring community, we bring hope, we bring effective alliances and so on. And so we need to work with our governments to kind of see where we go forward.
I think right now we have a lot of resources. Edric spoke about a couple of Christian websites. They produce like very good content. And I feel that these are actually nuggets of truth and inspiring story that basically are all out there. They are trending. They react to according to what's happening in society. They're very topical, and I think in the analog world, we've been encouraging all the members to do evangelism either through lifestyle or through we're all trained in EE to actually engage people one-on-one. But I think as we use technology, sometimes it may be as simple as picking up that piece of content and to share it with a friend who is in need or neighbor who is in need. And it's just so simple. And I wish that as we the thing about church planting, but perhaps the one thing we can do is this whole idea of just +1. If everybody in the church could just share one article or share one thought with a person, and every day it just keep on going, which means to kind of activate every church member to do evangelism in through social media, or if someone who's not comfortable on social media, they can do it on what we call the dark web, which is either through your messaging platform like your WhatsApp or your Telegram. The assets are there, and I think the church of tomorrow must embrace these platforms, because this is we are called to be the church of the times now. We must react to these tools.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Now, I'm going to ask one last question. I'm going to change the rhythm a little bit. We focus a lot on churches. There's an interesting question about AI chatbots doing prayers and engagement and giving sermons. Now, a very different kind of assets. What's your thoughts on this? Yeah, at least two questions on this.
For me, I love artificial intelligence because it does take promote a lot of efficiency, because a lot of mundane work that are performed by human beings can be replaced, right? But in my other mind, I feel that artificial intelligence are just very two words that are like oxymoron, right? Artificial intelligence, and a lot of times, they try to emulate the human taxonomy. I feel that they are unable to attune itself. Even the best of the artificial intelligence system that is being built, it probably won't be able to take on the divine download from God, and then to kind of translate that vividly. We've built a lot of artificial intelligence as well, and we realize that it is a constant effort to keep on coaching and putting on new taxonomies just so that they would know. So yeah, maybe as you can use AI as a chat to just ask like a few, like 5 questions, so that we know what is your interest, and so that we can divert you to very quickly, if you are handling a large volume of people coming in, where it's virtually impossible to have a 24-hour call center. That AI tool can be used as to achieve that purpose as well.
Shall I come on?
Yeah, go ahead.
So a few things. First of all, I think that you need, for preaching and for prayer and what have you, you actually need a human being, because I think that, well, perhaps that's me limited. I think you need a human being because that person needs to be inspired by God and needs to kind of be inspired by the Holy Spirit. Now, am I limiting God therefore in saying that God can't inspire an AI machine? Well, yeah, I suppose he can, but I'm just wary of that. I think let me kind of so Christian Vision in the global has a lab in which they explored some AI chatbots for evangelization or for evangelism, and they used AI in order to kind of have a funnel conversation with people, which led them to the question, do you want to give your life to Christ? Okay. Now people kind of were inquiring, they had questions to answer, they were taking down this conversation, they were asked that question, and some said yes, and they were then connected with a local church or a local pastor. Now the question is, has that AI machine led that person to Christ? Okay, if the answer is yes, then praise God, but there's a deep theological thing. God's the only one who does the conversion. Yeah, so did God use that channel in order to lead that conversation that particular way? When Christian Vision went back to the people who went through that conversation and said, by the way, did you know you're being led by an AI rather than a person? They said, no, we didn't, and we don't mind. Okay, we got the answers to our questions, and we were happy to respond to that question in that way, because they were engaging with God. So so that kind of answers my problem in the middle of my answer. Can God use AI? Can God use Alexa? Can God use, Siri, to, well, if he can use a donkey, if he uses Balaam's ass to kind of connect, then yes, he can use AI. But I'm not sure it's the most frequent way that God will choose to engage with us. The more frequent way is through the likes of you and me, who he will put in the right place to answer people's questions. Balaam's ass is not the common, most frequent way in which people are converted.
Okay. Edric, any comments?
Only that you are assuming that this is really me, a human being speaking, and I'm not a deep fake.
Thank you. Well, as I bring the whole event to an end, I'd just like to ask all three speakers. So, what do you have any final comments, final remarks, final thoughts about our topic for today? Maybe in 2 or 3 sentences, you can share that.
Let me just start on this. My main thought when it comes to digital in the end times is really what Jesus said about the gospel being preached to the ends of the earth before he comes again. That really is my overwhelming thought when I think about digital church. That of all the things we talk about us and how we do church, but to me, I think the big focus for us is how do we use this to make sure the gospel reaches the ends of the earth? Because it could never happen. If you read Revelations 11, the 2 witnesses, for example, the whole world is going to watch that going on. They're going to watch, they're going to laugh at these people, and then they're going to be in shock and awe, when God calls them up again. And the only way the whole world is going to watch, just like when we watched 911 happening a few years ago, a couple of decades ago, we all watched it on CNN. We switched it on, and we could all see it happening. Right now, it's just going to happen on digital. So how are we using digital for global outreach? This to me is really interesting. I just end with just one little story. I know some people who are blessed with $1,000. This is in a neighboring country to Singapore. They're blessed with $1,000. They said, do whatever you want of it to help your ministry. They put out a Facebook post and they boosted it. And that Facebook post basically asked the question, have you ever dreamt of a man in white? Out of that $1,000 US, they got a few hundred responses, out of which there were a few dozen continued conversations, out of which there were a couple dozen face-to-face meetings, out of which there were a handful or a couple of baptisms, right? That's a really rudimentary, shall we say, way of using digital, but it works. It's a way that they could never have done in that country of many islands before. So how are we thinking of digital to fulfill that particular part of the end times, that the gospel will be preached to the ends of the earth?
Thanks, Edric.
Maybe just let me follow up on that. I think this whole COVID episode that we all went through, I think God would never allow a story like that to be wasted. And I think the acceleration of accessibility of church content, if you will, right? And now that most of the churches are able to upload their service, their preaching, their sharing, their testimony online, this is something that we've all dreamt for, right? And with this ability, as we now progress into a safer zone, and I think there's something that we all can learn from it, and we shouldn't be so fast to think about, let's go back to how we used to do it. Rather, I think I'd like to encourage all of us to take this back and see how we can actually deepen the use of digital tool as one of the core tools that we use in our church.
Thanks, Jeff. And Pete?
Yeah, so I think the Edric's right, that it's about the audience. Is it if we can move from, here in the UK, 4 million people normally attend church, but 15.6 million people in our population are engaging with online worship in some way, then we have quadrupled the audience who might hear the message about Jesus. That's an important factor. If we want the gospel to be shared with all people, and we are in the end times, of course we are, then that's really important. But it does more than that, because it actually allows people to hear the gospel in a safe place. It allows them to hear the gospel at home, where they feel secure, and they feel that therefore they might be more receptive to that gospel message. But I think it also speaks the language of the contemporary society. We are a digital society. We are an increasingly digital society. Here in the UK, digital penetration to most age groups is well above 80%. And amongst the youth, it's, almost 100%. Now, a number of people are dropping off because they don't want to engage with digital, but I think our society as a whole will move further and further down digital as being a major form of communication. And it's good for the church to be there and to be taught this lesson during COVID, because it has moved us on so quickly, so fast in our push. But we also need to remember the joy of meeting together and singing together and worshiping together in a physical place. That though we may be resigned at the moment to kind of meeting at home or meeting through digitality, we must never forget that we must meet together and share fellowship with one another physically as well, when that's appropriate. It's both and, it's not one or the other.
It's both and not one or the other. I think that's a very good way of ending this. Digital is not something that we just aspire for the sake of it, but it's always a means for us to love God and to love our neighbor better. Now, on this note, I'd like to thank our panelists and speakers for your contribution, for sharing with us your wisdom and your experience on this subject. And I would like to thank everyone who is out there on YouTube who has been participating. And of course, I invite the panelists and speakers to really go into the YouTube chat. There's a lot that's happening out there also. And probably some questions you can pick up there. Now, before I end off, I just have a few more announcements. Just can we have the slides to roll out? What's ahead for us? Now, this is the first of our Theology for Life lectures. The next one that's going to come up is, can I have the next slide? Yeah. Is by Professor David Gill, Workplace Discipleship in a Multicultural Context. This will be held on the 24th of April 2021. So just be on the watch out at BGST's website for the registration details. And the next slide, please. Thank you. Now, BGST, when we were planning this course, Christians in the Disruptive and Digital World, COVID hasn't really kicked in yet. It was somewhat in February. We didn't realize that this course that we had planned is going to turn out to be very relevant as it is now. We invite you to join us as we pioneer this course in about a month's time. That's taught by Seng Kong, our systematic theologian, and myself. Now, one more slide, please. Now, finally, we are launching a Zoom executive certificates in workplace leadership, and we have an information session on that certificate. And this is basically a talk called Leading in the New Norm. What spiritual resources do we need to bring to bear in order to be a leader in the post-COVID-19 world? So join us also. Registration details are also there on our website. So with this, once again, thank you to our speakers and panelists for sharing with us your wisdom. And to everyone out there who has joined us from all over the world, from Helsinki to US and to Singapore, of course. Thank you.